The United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees says a probe into whether some of its employees took part in the October 7th terror attack on Israel will report its findings by next month. Now, the agency has been rocked by allegations made by Israel that at least 13 of its employees engaged in terrorist acts last October and that hundreds more work for militant Islamist groups, including Hamas, in the Gaza Strip. Some of the agency's biggest donors, including the U.S. and Germany, suspended contributions because of these claims. I'll be putting these allegations to the agency's former spokesman in just a moment, but first, here's what's being said right now.
And we have discovered in the last few weeks that UNRWA officials were complicit in the massacre. And I think it's time that the international community and the UN itself understand that UNRWA's mission has to end.
The Secretary General notes that these accusations come at a time that UNRWA, the largest UN organization in the region, is working under extremely challenging conditions.
And these people living here, working here, UNRWA, they are poisoning the head, the brain of children in Jerusalem. They are poisoning them against me, against Israel, against Jews.
We have currently 19 donors that have suspended funding. The agency is able to continue providing services until the end of March, but then we have no longer visibility of how the operations will continue.
Well, my next guest is Christopher Gunnis, the former spokesperson for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. He is now executive director of the Myanmar Accountability Project. It's good to have you with us tonight. There's a lot to talk about here.
Thank you so much.
Israel has issued quite an indictment against your former place of employment. What do you have to say to this?
Well, Israel has produced some information. I wouldn't use even the word indictment because it's clear from those who have seen this document, and to be clear, the dossier has never been handed over to UNRWA, either by the Israelis or by the major donors, including the German government. So to be clear, the dossier, as it's so called, and those who have seen it can confirm, does not actually have evidence to link UNRWA staff members to the actual massacres. So there may be circumstantial evidence, but it's very clear that the description of this as a dodgy dossier, in reference to the dossier that Tony Blair used to take Britain to war in Iraq, is perhaps the right description of it. There is no actual evidence. There are accusations. Even the New York Times, which has been a willing accomplice to this piece of news management, even the New York Times correspondent in Jerusalem has admitted that much of this information is basically an Israeli file that is unchecked, it's uncorroborated. Antony Blinken himself has said that the great security service of the United States have been unable to confirm this information independently. And yet, for some reason, he says he finds it compelling. I mean, I don't understand the logic. I think that this decision was rushed. I think it's disproportionate. And I think it's punitive because we have to think of the people under huge stress in Gaza, under what the ICJ has called a plausible genocide.
Well,
they are now potentially going to be deprived. Sorry.
Let me ask you, did you expect this kind of accusation to come from Israel? And did you expect it to come when it did?
Well, not at all. UNRWA in May last year gave Israel a staff list of all of UNRWA workers in the West Bank and in Gaza, and Israel did not come back with any suspicions or accusations against any of the staff members that we handed over the list of. And yet, surprise, surprise, within about a day of the ICJ making the accusation that there's a plausible genocide case to be answered, we have this piece of information coming out into the press. The thing I would say, though, it's surprising to me because UNRWA has a zero tolerance policy towards these neutrality violations. We work with our major donors, including the German government. We see this as a partnership with the German government. So the failure, such as it's being described, is as much a failure of the German government that's worked with UNRWA on these neutrality frameworks as it is the staff of UNRWA. And let me say, Sorry, after you.
I just wanted to say that what you're saying there, you're saying that the vetting process for all of your team members, for all of your employees, that vetting process was complete and thorough, that you don't have any doubts whatsoever that some people may have been able to slip through.
UNRWA runs the entire staff list through the Security Council's terrorism list, and there were no matches. But to be additionally careful as part of this zero tolerance policy, that list was handed over to Israel in May 2023, and not a single issue was raised. What more can I say? And let me say, this decision by the donors, including Germany, that gives UNRWA 200 million euros each year, is a violation of humanitarian principles of impartiality. It's also a violation of international humanitarian law, which forbids food aid being used as a weapon of war. It's a violation of the ICJ's interim provisional measures, which made it clear that no member state should take any action that would limit humanitarian aid. And very lastly, it's a violation potentially of the Genocide Convention, which makes it an obligation of all state parties to prevent genocide. So frankly, Germany stands accused, in my view, of being complicit in a violation of the Genocide Convention. And for a country like Germany, with its history, that is something which I think should be addressed. I think there should be an investigation into whether Germany's humanitarian aid was ring-fenced against political influence. And I think that just as the donors, such as Germany, are pointing the finger at UNRWA and saying, well, you've been politicizing your aid, what about Germany? Germany is weaponizing UNRWA, and it's doing so, let me say, because Israeli far-right politicians are calling for UNRWA to be dismantled, to be defunded, and to be destroyed.
Let me pick up on that. I mean,
sure.
there are these calls for UNRWA to be dismantled. What would happen then to the civilians in the Gaza Strip if your former agency, if they were not able to carry out what they're supposed to do?
Well, there are 1.2 million people on UNRWA's food distribution lists, and they are facing starvation. So that's why Germany would be held complicit in the genocide, because thousands of people may well starve to death. The UN says 400,000 people are facing starvation imminently. Germany would be complicit in that, which, as I say, is a violation of the Genocide Convention. But it's not just in Gaza.
Well, Mr. Geddes, let me just throw out there to you. That case is before the World Court. So, there has not been a determination that genocide is happening there. So we don't want to throw that word out. We don't want to do that.
Genocide. There's a case to answer.
We're not saying that anyone wants anyone to starve to death either. My question to you, though, is there is criticism coming that there may have been Hamas sympathizers within the ranks of UNRWA. Is it possible to rule that out completely? As a reasonable person, can you rule that out completely?
Even the 12 people who were being accused, that is 12 or 13, the figure keeps changing, bad apples, and they've not actually, the investigation's not even over. UNRWA dismissed these people before the investigation was over. So, if this were to be the case, and it's not proven, it would be a tiny percentage of the staff. This, to me, is proof that the zero tolerance policy is working, that in somewhere as polarized as Gaza, so few UNRWA staff members are accused by Israel, to whom the staff list was handed over last May.
Please, there's lots to talk about. I'm sure that we will have the opportunity to talk again. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We appreciate you taking the time to talk with us tonight. Thank you.
Pleasure. Good night.